Roe-Deer by Ted Hughes first appeared in the 1978 collection Moonbells and Other Poems, but was then republished a year later in the 1979 collection Moortown Diary. The poems in the first collection, aimed at a younger audience, concern themselves with thresholds and the crossing of boundaries, and we can clearly see this idea in Roe-Deer as the pair of deer momentarily cross the threshold between their own realm and that of the poet. The poems in the second collection concern themselves with everyday life on Moortown Farm, near Winkley in mid-Devon, which initially belonged to his father-in-law, but is where Hughes spent many of his later years, and so we can assume that this is where his encounter with the deer took place. In the poem, the speaker, who we can assume to be Hughes himself, is out for either an early morning walk or drive during a heavy snowfall. All of a sudden, he is aware of two deer standing in the road in front of him. He is as transfixed by them as they appear to be by him. Although this chance encounter only lasts for a few seconds, time seems suspended as Hughes feels as though a veil has been momentarily lifted between their respective dimensions, and he has the privilege to get the merest of glimpses into their private world. The deer then move off, through the hedge and across a field towards a wood, to be swallowed up by the falling snow. Even their hoof prints are rapidly obliterated, leaving no trace of their ever having been there. The spell is broken, leaving Hughes feeling that the world has reverted to being merely ordinary once more. The poem explores the interplay between the human world and what Hughes sees as an often arcane natural world, and the way in which these serendipitous encounters, no matter how brief, can be transformative experiences. The poem comprises 11 stanzas. 10 of these are couplets, while the remaining stanza, stanza 7, is a single line. The poem is written in free verse, which means that it has no fixed metrical or rhythmic structure and no set rhyme scheme. Line lengths vary between 6 and 15 syllables. Hughes makes extensive use of enchantment. Only 5 of the lines are in fact end-stopped, and some use of caesura to modulate the rhythm. It's interesting to note the interplay between the short stanzas, which should make the poem seem disjointed, and the enchantment, which creates a sense of fluidity and momentum, perhaps suggesting that while the nature of the encounter may be visually fragmentary, due to the low visibility caused by the falling snow, a feature to which Hughes refers on several occasions, it is nonetheless a pleasing and harmonious quasi-spiritual experience. Musicality and cohesion are further generated through Hughes's use of sound patterning techniques, such as alliteration, e.g. in the dawn dirty light, and snow screen. Consonants, e.g. 2 blue dark deer stood in the road alerted, and assonants, e.g. 2 blue dark deer stood and snow lonely. Hughes' diction is, as is usual for him, plain and simple, although there are examples of his signature original compound adjectives such as dawn dirty, blue dark, snow screen, all way, and snow lonely, as well as extensive use of metaphor, all of which create imagery that is concise yet evocative. The title, Roe-Deer, is a simple reference to the poem's subject matter. Roe-Deer are one of 2 native species of deer in Britain. They have brownish coats which turn redder in the summer, but a darker grey in the winter months. Although they are generally a solitary species, they do tend to go around in small groups during the winter. The poem begins, "In the dawn dirty light, in the biggest snow of the year, 2 blue dark deer stood in the road alerted." Hughes uses the first line to set the scene. It is early in the morning, just before the sun has risen. The alliterative, compound adjective of Hughes's own creation, dawn dirty, evokes the time of day when the twilight makes everything appear drained of colour and grey, and it is snowing heavily. Note the use of anaphora here, with a repetition of in the, which gives this line a rhythmic, almost dreamlike quality and builds up a sense of anticipation. There is also a pronounced use of alliteration and consonants here, with the repeated plosive d, the heaviness of the sound perhaps suggesting the momentousness of the occasion. Another original compound adjective, blue dark, rather than perhaps dark blue, puts the emphasis on the quality of the darkness itself rather than the colour, and evokes how the character of the light makes the deer's darker grey fur seem to have a bluish tinge. The deer seem just as surprised to see him as he is to see them, as they stand there alerted, assessing just how much of a threat he may be to them. The second stanza continues, "They had happened into my dimension the moment I was arriving there." The verb happened here means found or come across by chance. In other words, this is a purely random, serendipitous encounter. He seems to be using the phrase my dimension here to suggest that he sees the human and natural worlds as separate, alternate or parallel universes or realities that, while coexisting, rarely collide with one another. Hughes develops this idea in the third stanza as he continues, "They planted their 2 or 3 years of secret deerhood clear on my snow-screen vision of the abnormal." The verb planted here suggests a certain firmness to their actions that makes him aware of their physicality, and the use of the made-up deerhood in the same way that one would speak of manhood or childhood, to reference the condition or state of being a deer, modified by the adjective secret, also suggests that their way of existing is arcane because it is largely unobserved by humans. In the metaphor, my snow screen vision of the abnormal, Hughes seems to be referring, with the compound adjective snow screen, to the snow interference effect seen on the screens of analogue televisions, the precursor of digital televisions which didn't exist in the 1970s, which was a result of random noise picked up by the antenna, to evoke how his vision is obscured by the falling flakes of snow. The word abnormal perhaps suggests the way the heavy snow has made the landscape around him seem surreal. Note that even though his surroundings seem blurred and fuzzy, the deer appear to him clear or sharply in focus as they hesitated in the all-way disintegration and stared at me. Note that Hughes once more uses a compound adjective to evoke how the snow is all-encompassing, as the swirling flakes seem to be fragments of a larger entity that is breaking apart around him. The use of caesura in the next line, after "and stared at me," created by the full stop, forces the reader to pause and reflects this moment of stasis as man and creature gaze silently at one another. The oxymoron lasting seconds conjures the way in which time seems to slow, as Hughes imagines that the deer were waiting for me to remember the password and signed that the curtain had blown aside for a moment. The poet seems to sense that these two young deer are the gatekeepers of a parallel universe that inhabits the same space and time as ours, but that can only be accessed when the metaphorical curtain separating them is blown aside for a moment, and if the correct password and sign are given and received. The poem continues, "And there, where the trees were no longer trees, or the road a road, the deer had come for me." Hughes is probably referring here to how his surroundings have become so hidden by snow that they are no longer recognisable. Although there is also a sense that he feels that the real world, in terms of its place in space as well as time, has melted away, and that he is in some sort of half-world between that of man and that of beast. Note how he has used enchantment over the previous 5.5 lines to really build up a feeling of time slowing and the seconds stretching, as he and the deer seem to have a moment of silent communion. Note also how he juxtaposes the poem's longest line of 15 syllables against its shortest of 6, which also happens to be the poem's only one-line stanza, to create a build-up to its climax, to momentarily elevate this chance encounter to one that is loaded with significance and purpose. The spell is abruptly broken as they ducked through the hedge, and upright they rode their legs away downhill over a snow lonely field towards tree dark. Hughes uses an interesting image, "they rode their legs," to describe how the deer trot away over the field, perhaps to evoke the elegance and nobility with which they move, also suggested by the adjective upright. He creates another compound adjective, snow, lonely, to evoke the way the blanketed field stretches away bleakly towards the darkness of the woods. Note the assonance of the long O vowel here, which similarly stretches the sound to enhance this image. The deer eventually disappear, seeming to eddy and glide and fly away up into the boil of big flakes. The verb to eddy means to move in a circular manner and is usually used to describe water, air, or smoke. And so it appears that Hughes is deliberately using this triad of verbs here, which would more appropriately describe the movement of the falling snow. Note the polysyndeton that links them rhythmically, to suggest that the deer are ethereal, magical beings. The metaphor boil of big flakes evokes the swirling of the flakes like that of the rising bubbles in boiling water. Hughes personifies the snow which took the deer and soon their nearby hoofprints as well, to suggest, rather than their bodies and their hoofprints being obscured by the falling snow, that the snow has the power to spirit them away. At the end of the poem, Hughes is left alone, and it seems as though the deer have never even been there at all, as the continuing snowfall revises its dawn inspiration back to the ordinary. The use of the word inspiration here suggests that Hughes has felt momentarily spiritually uplifted by the encounter, and that, now the deer have vanished, the world has reverted to the mundane. Thanks for watching. If you have any questions, please let me know in the comments section below, and I'll do my best to answer them. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel for more videos on English language topics and exam techniques and English literature texts.